Welcome to our OnePlan Academy hosted Tech Tuesday. Today's topic is getting connected with OnePlan and Azure DevOps and the integration made easy. For those of you who are new to this, or even for those of you who have been here with us before, just a reminder, Tech Tuesday is a webinar series presented by OnePlan Academy. We're here to provide short, focused sessions on OnePlan best practices, tips, and tricks. Throughout this series, we will explore all aspects of OnePlan. Today's webinar is part 2 in a series of 3 webinars showcasing OnePlan's OneConnect powerful integration with Azure DevOps and how it helps your teams use OnePlan and ADO to collaborate and work more efficiently while still being able to use the tools that they're used to using. My name is Deb Roth, and I'm the Director of OnePlan Education and Training. I'm here with Tina Shirk, OnePlan Knowledge Architect, OnePlan Community Manager Stephanie Salsini, and OnePlan's OneConnect Senior Software Quality Assurance Engineer, and our special guest today, OneConnect Subject Matter Expert Caroline Pastorelli. Our goal today is to show you how to get the most out of OnePlan and Azure DevOps by connecting the two platforms with OneConnect. By the end of today's webinar, you'll gain a deeper understanding of how OneConnect with Azure DevOps can help you and your teams collaborate more efficiently. Caroline's going to walk you through how the integration is set up and how using OneConnect with Azure DevOps helps your teams collaborate more efficiently, reduce manual effort, help keep data aligned across these systems, and how to continue to use the applications you're all familiar with. Throughout today's webinar, we'll also share real-world integration scenarios, and we'll point out some tips and tricks for getting started. So what is OneConnect for ADO? Caroline, I think that's a great question.
Yes.
You want to go through
that? If you are familiar at all with OneConnect, it is basically our integration platform. So this can be used to set up any number of integrations. One of our most common integration for clients is actually our Azure DevOps, or ADO for short. What this integration can do is it can easily connect and streamline your data between Azure DevOps and OnePlan. You can create seamless bridge between strategic planning in OnePlan and agile execution in Azure DevOps. What you can also do is synchronize data. So sometimes the initial setup might be a little, might take a few steps. Every environment is different, so we want to make sure that we're syncing the correct data over and also having the values and what's important to you as a project manager come over from Azure DevOps to OnePlan or vice versa. This is a two-way integration, so we can have data go in both directions, and how you set up your integration could affect the what you see in OnePlan. So if you have your development team in Azure DevOps and their markings, their features, and their user stories as complete, you can take advantage of our automation features, which is streamlining manual syncs or even scheduling strategies to run every night to make sure when you come in the next morning, you have the most up-to-date information. Why is this important? Well, definitely we enhance collaboration. What that means is we can remove a lot of the communication gaps that often happen when teams use different tools. Project managers and developers can now work in their preferred systems without losing their alignment, which is really awesome. For example, a PMO could be tracking the milestones in OnePlan while the dev team is working in sprints in Azure DevOps. They can now both see progress that's on the same deliverables in real time. There's no need to chase each other down and try to get daily or weekly updates. Unifies workflows. One of the biggest pain points in project delivery is when workflows break across tools. Depending on how you set up your integration, you can actually streamline that. What is one value in Azure DevOps could be an equivalent value in OnePlan, vice versa. You can also encourage on standardizing processes across teams. This is especially important in hybrid environments. Not every environment is strictly agile or waterfall or traditional. When data is flowing between the systems, you can get pretty much immediate insight into the project health and team progress. What this means is that you can look at your OnePlan plan, sync the data over, make sure everything looks good, and get real-time information as to what the latest information is in Azure DevOps. This is also for most of our integrations as well. Improves efficiency. When you begin to set up your integration and tinker it to the best of what works for you and your environment or your company, you can now start automating data syncing, reduce a lot of manual input. You don't have to type in as many things. Once you have it dialed in, it really is a powerful tool that I think is awesome, and it can save a ton of time. How often do project managers have to chase down developers for status updates? Every company sees it all the time. This will allow the latest and greatest and all the relevant information from discussion notes to statuses and multi-choices and user allocation. All right, so I'm going to give you a quick little demo. All right, so I'm using OnePlan. I also have a tab open for OneConnect. I do have an Azure DevOps integration already set up that I can walk you through some common scenarios and certain functionalities. And then I can also show you my Azure DevOps. This is pretty straightforward. What I can definitely encourage is how do you want to connect your data from Azure DevOps to OnePlan? There are two main methods or options that you as a user in OnePlan can use. The first one is going to be, let's go to a program, and I'm going to expand this and create a new plan. I can do this in OnePlan. So in here, I'm just going to create a new epic. And I'm going to say this is going to be partner programs. There are a few ways that you can connect this epic partner programs to Azure DevOps. I'm going to jump to the work plan, go to the list, create a blank plan. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go to the connected systems icon. From here, I can see all of my integrations that I have currently in this group. Azure DevOps is the one that I want to go to, and I will click Next. I now have a choice if I wish to create this item in Azure DevOps as a new item or connect to an existing item. I actually already have in here a partner integration strategy that I have yet to sync over, so I'm going to connect this to an existing item. Once I do this, I'm given a pretty lengthy form, but this is how we can sync the data correctly. So from here, from the team project, I'm going to click on this dropdown. It's now going to query all of my available team projects. I only have 2. I'm going to go to my demo project. From here, in this view, I'm actually at the root, so the demo project team. But if you use area paths, you can easily click on this dropdown and it will show you the entire list of area paths. From there, I can now select all of or any of the items that I wish to connect to. Concept development and user interface enhancements are already connected, so I'm going to select partner integration strategy. From here, I want to bring in all items regardless of the iteration or the sprint that it's in, and all of the work types I'm going to leave blank because I want everything to come in. This work type list is actually coming in from your integration settings, and we'll get into that in a little bit. There's also an additional setting here called Add Items to Schedule. What this will do is, if I have this box checked, it will import the items from Azure DevOps to my work plans backlog and my work plan schedule. So I'm going to click Connect because I want to see both items come in. From there, the connected systems window will now open, and what it's going to do is it's going to trigger a job, which will now reach out to my Azure DevOps environment, get the relevant information, and then bring it back into OnePlan. While this is running, I'm going to talk a little bit about those work item types. Once you navigate to my OneConnect, you can see your list of Azure, integrations. I only have one here. If I click Edit Integration, this is going to give me two connectors, my OnePlan connector, which is how I authenticate to OnePlan, and my Azure DevOps connector, which is how I authenticate to Azure DevOps. I'm going to expand Azure DevOps. No matter what, you will need the environment URL, so it's usually dev.azure.com and then the organization name. Currently, there are two methods to authenticate to Azure DevOps. The first one is your personal access token. Another one that we've recently come out with in the past year was service principal authentication. When I expand additional options, this is going to be a little bit more technical details on how I want my integration to go. I'm using out-of-the-box settings, but you are more than welcome to change this however your organization sees fit. I currently only wanted one work item type called Epic to come into OnePlan. So any Epic that I have in Azure DevOps, I could now use that, and from the forms that we saw earlier, it will show me the epics that I can connect to. Underneath, this is going to be all of the work item types that will go into my work plan backlog, or if I have that checkbox set that we saw earlier, it's going to sync these items also into the schedule. I want all of my items to come in, regardless of if they're in a sprint or not. But for clients who have large volumes of data and only want to see the latest or most relevant information, they might want to uncheck this box and only bring in tasks and bugs that are in a sprint, as opposed to things that just all over the place. This integration was intended to come in as read-only. If you wish to have a bidirectional sync, you will have to have this checkbox checked. Should you want to change this, you are more than welcome to do so at any time. You would just have to alter something. So I will say I no longer wish to have my change request. Once I do that, I can click Save. And now later on, when I go into OnePlan and see that drop down of available work item types, that item will no longer be available. All right, so let's go back. It looks like it's still syncing, so it's taking a little minute. Let's go into a little bit more details as to what you can do on the OnePlan side. All right, so when authenticating to OnePlan, the only mandatory field that you will need is actually the authentication key that you can get from your configuration page in OnePlan. It's encouraged, especially if you have more than one OnePlan group. You might have one for QA and one for production or one for even testing. Giving this a name helps you know where this integration is or it's intended to be. If you expand additional options, you'll have some additional settings. If you have more than one Azure DevOps environment, for example, some clients will acquire other companies who also use Azure DevOps, you can actually give your tile a name. So earlier when we saw the two integrations, Project Online and Azure DevOps, I can actually give that tile a name so I know that this goes to this particular environment and not the other one. This helps if you have more than one Azure DevOps integration, pointing to the same OnePlan group. I have a default plan type of Tech Tuesday, but I was just doing this for giggles. This will be for a scenario or for integrations that do not have a certain field mapping, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Sync to schedule. When you install an integration, sync to schedule is checked automatically. However, if you do not want any of your items to be imported into the work plan schedule, you can have this box unchecked. If you change this value at any point in time while the integration is already installed, you will have to reinstall the integration. It won't break any of your field mappings or any of your item mappings either, so it is pretty safe. When I say reinstall an integration also, I mean you can navigate to the Tools tab, go to Reinstall, and when you click on this, you can click Start and it will just reinstall to update the data. Nothing will be lost. For integrations, there are quite a number of ways that you can sync data over into OnePlan. The most common one will be fields. Field mappings are broken down into two segments, one at the plan level, so in this case, my epics in Azure DevOps to my plans in OnePlan. And then I have my work item types in Azure DevOps to my backlog or work plan data. If I wish to add or modify any of the data coming from Azure DevOps to OnePlan or vice versa, I can just expand this table and I can see the data that is currently set. Title will just create the name of the plan. Parent item ID is actually going to be most commonly used when you have more than one work item type from Azure DevOps coming into OnePlan at the plan level. So if I wish to have epics and features come into OnePlan at the plan level, I can have this field mapping set so I can maintain that parent-child relationship for the two work item types. Work item type and portfolio plan type. So in this particular case, I have the work item type of epic, and it's going to go to the portfolio plan type of epic. If epic does not exist in OnePlan, you might want to do something called value mapping to make sure that it's given the correct plan type in OnePlan. And then the assigned to value is given owner. As you can see, these fields are all set to be bidirectional. However, some clients want this integration to only be in one direction, or certain fields to go in one direction, whereas other fields can be bidirectional. Should that happen, feel free to just click on the button in the middle and it will change the direction in which the data is intended to flow. Same thing with your backlogs. I can have my assigned to, my target date, my work item type, all these items come over into OnePlan or vice versa. However, I might want to say my target date in Azure DevOps, I don't want OnePlan to modify this. So I can just change this. And now, whenever I export data from OnePlan going back to Azure DevOps, this field will not be changed. One thing to note for this integration is when you have fields that are only going from Azure DevOps to OnePlan, and you have this set to be in a single direction going into OnePlan and not being exported to, when I import data into OnePlan for those plans, my due date will now be considered read-only, so I won't have the ability to modify this. Just something to take note of. It is best practice to map the fields that you think are necessary and control how you want the data to go in. I really do encourage having things like status or target dates or things like that be set to one direction unless you know that it's going to be both sides as the source of truth. For choice fields, this is actually really important. If I am to map a choice field from Azure DevOps to OnePlan, you can have the data sync over and have matching values. So new is new. However, some clients will have new in Azure DevOps be not started in OnePlan or some variation of pending. When that happens, we actually have something called value mapping. This will allow me to say any work item type that is in Azure DevOps of the status of new, I can then go here. It was state, sorry. State of new, and I can have it come into OnePlan of in progress. And I can do that for any values that don't match quite exactly. This is especially important for clients who have different languages, because most of the time when you sync choice values, you need to make sure that the value matches Azure OnePlan correctly, and vice versa. Azure DevOps wouldn't know that in progress is supposed to translate to new or some other alternative to that. Syncing data. There are two ways to sync data into OnePlan or back into Azure DevOps. The first way we already did. We went into OnePlan, we connected, and now we have the item that exists. However, this is for a manual import, and that might not always be the case or best practice, especially if you have a lot of plans. If you go into OneConnect, you can actually start scheduling when you wish to have a certain strategy run. OnePlan update is a strategy that grabs the data from Azure DevOps and imports that data into OnePlan. So if I want to have this happen 3 times in one day, I can do so. First, I would have to set my schedule type. Let's do daily, and I want it to have occur Monday through Friday. From there, I can now go for what times of day do I want to have this strategy trigger. Perhaps I have some people that start kind of early, so I want to have all my data brought over at 4 a.m., at noon, and at 5 p.m. Minutes after the hour, a lot of our clients have these syncs scheduled at the top of the hour. You can actually change when you have it triggered so data can transfer a little bit faster when there's not as much traffic. From there, you can do delta types. There are 2 types of deltas. You can have incremental, so you only bring over the data that has a modified date since the last sync, which is usually our default. This is best practice because now it only brings over the relevant data and not everything. The other option is a full delta type. This means anything that is synced over and that you want to have come over will come over regardless of if it has been modified or not. But note that when there's more data to process, there's a longer amount of time for this strategy to run. If you have a small amount of data, that should be fine, but for hundreds, if not thousands of work item types, that might not be best practice. Once I click save, I will notice that this now highlights in blue for the days that I have this set. The time right here is set for 3 different times, 4:30, 12:30, and 5:30. This was my last successful run, and then this was my last run. You can see that this strategy is enabled, so it can trigger at any time, and that the last run was successful with the green checkbox. But what does that mean? Maybe I want to see a little bit more detail. I can do so by clicking the View Schedule Logs and seeing that 43 minutes ago, I ran this and it ran successfully. I can expand the logs and see a little bit more detail. I have 16 epics in my environment. However, I only have 2 items that are already mapped. I have a filter in place, which allows me to only bring over the relevant data. From here, this is actually the Azure DevOps ID of that epic. And I can see that 62 and 67 were brought over and they processed successfully. If this area, for some reason, is a lot of, if there are a lot of strategies, if there's multiple pages, you can also go here where I can go to my schedules and I can see this in a different view. I can also go up to 100 entries per page and see what strategies ran. OnePlan update versus OnePlan publish, sync lookups, things like that. This table up here is for jobs that are currently in the process of running. So it could be halfway through in the beginning or towards the end of the sync. Down here is the area of only completed jobs. This is for scheduled jobs. If you were to run an event, like we did earlier, you would go to the events section and you can see the latest. Events are important because you can actually see a lot more information. It might get a little technical at times, so unless there's an actual issue, I wouldn't worry too much on it. All right, so let's go into OnePlan, and let me click close, and let me show you my environment. So I actually have partner programs that was created in OnePlan. I connected it to partner integration strategy in ADO. If I expand this, I have 2 features and a collection of product backlogs nested underneath each other in a hierarchy. If I go into OnePlan, I can actually see that same hierarchy showcased here. I have assigned resources, I have the name, I have the work type of backlog, and if I wish, I can actually change my field mappings to sync more relevant data should that be necessary. This was in the schedule. However, you can also see the same thing in your backlog. This also gives you your sprint data, just because it's the view. So we were able to see how we can connect to existing items in Azure DevOps, how the data can now sync to your schedule. If I were to go here and look at all of my epics, I see that I have 3 epics together. If I go to concept development, let's see, I can click open item. Doing so should take me directly to that item, so concept development. If I go into the actual work plan, and I wish to look a little bit more closely as to log in using a secure SSO method, I can click on that ID and it will take me directly to that specific item. In my backlogs, again, the hierarchy is still maintained. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. This would be considered a best practice, and that would be making sure that all of your area paths and all of your projects have the same hierarchy structure. Because if I have different fields for different work item types that are essentially the same thing, like state, but with different names, it can be harder to sync values over between OnePlan and Azure DevOps. Having a set hierarchy structure is also considered a best practice. Just so we can say, hey, if you were to have more than one work item type in Azure DevOps, it would be best to have that same hierarchy structure of epic and feature coming in at the plan level, as opposed to an epic, a user story, and then a feature. From here, that's pretty much the majority of it. Most times clients will have some fun with value mappings and editing what fields they want to have synced over. The next item would be how many times they wish to sync data over as well. I'm not sure if Craig went over it, but we do have a licensing type for all of our integrations. There are 3 tiers. There is a basic, a professional, and an enterprise. Currently, this demo is doing an enterprise license, which means I can trigger a strategy to run up to 24 times in one day. So if I have 2 different strategies, it would be 48 times in one day. But yeah. So let's talk about how to actually set up your integration. This can be confusing, especially for those who might not have the correct permissions. So let's go into this. Clicking Add Integration, you will see a plethora of tiles for integrations. What I'm going to do is I'm going to type in Azure DevOps, and I will click on the Azure DevOps tile. As mentioned before, you will need a OnePlan authentication key. So if I want, I can go in here. As an owner, I can navigate to my configuration page, and I can add a new key. From here, I will copy this value, because if I refresh this page, that key will no longer be visible. You would have to generate a new key each time. Clicking the authentication key, I'm going to say this is Tech Tuesdays. And in here, I'm actually going to change my button name for this integration. I'm going to say that this is for demo. Everything else I'm going to keep as is. Sometimes when you copy and paste key values, you can copy it slightly incorrectly. So I always encourage that you click test to ensure that the connection to that program actually works. Sometimes it can take a minute, but if it works correctly, you will see in the top right corner, connected successfully. If there seems to be an issue with connecting, you will see a message in the bottom in red over here. As you can see, everything worked successfully, so we're going to click next. The Azure DevOps URL, I'm going to go into my demo project, and I'm going to highlight this area. And all you need is dev.azure.com and the organization name. So I'm going to copy this and enter that value here. For this integration, I'm still going to use a personal access token. However, if you are curious on setting up this integration using a service principal, we do have a couple documents available online in our support. Personal access token is limiting for the fact that you can only have a personal access token for up to 1 year. The person who generated this personal access token, if they leave the company or anything like that, this personal access token will expire, and their permission, therefore the personal access token's permission, will also affect this integration. It is encouraged to have a service account generate the personal access token, but the service principal is also helpful because you don't have to worry about most of these limitations. In my environment, I am the owner of everything, so I do have access to everything. But for those who wish to test this integration out, just be aware of how or where you can connect to what projects, and then you can test using that. However, if you go over into Azure DevOps, go to User Settings, go down to Personal Access Tokens, I can now see my list of current and active tokens, but I can also generate a new one. Giving this a name, giving it an expiration date. If I go to the very end, as you can see, it will only allow me to go up to a year. For this demo, I have full access. However, for those who are more security conscious, I would suggest that you just do the bare minimum. The bare minimum would be going to identity, read and manage, as well as going to, where are you? Work types or work items. Read, write, and manage. Clicking create will generate a token that I encourage you keep in a secure location. If you wish to get a new token, the steps are pretty much the same, unless you wish to regenerate a token. That will make the previous value that I just copied invalid, and you will have to replace it in all of your integrations. Using the personal access token, keeping everything out of the box. If I click test, I can do the same thing for Azure DevOps. If there was an issue, it would show me at the very bottom. And then when I click next, now this integration is going to install in my OnePlan group. What this installation does is it sets up the connected systems window. It creates a line item in your configuration for the integrations page of the Azure DevOps integration itself. So if you might have an issue, this is the way that you can locate that integration. And that's pretty much it out of the box for what would happen on this installation. Should you wish to uninstall or remove this integration, the tile will be removed and you might lose the icon for the items that you have mapped. Because if you wish to delete this integration, that icon will no longer allow you to open up to that Azure DevOps item. Installation usually takes about a minute. After that, you are always encouraged to look at your field mappings, making sure everything installed correctly, and potentially any other issues. As you saw prior, the out-of-the-box fields were all bidirectional for both the plans and the backlogs, but just double checking that this is what you wanted is always encouraged. For schedules, you can see that nothing has ran and that there are actually two filters here. These filters are usually going to be at the plan level. And what this means is for values that are already mapped between Azure DevOps and OnePlan, in this case, these will be synced values. As you saw in the strategy run that I did earlier on the other integration, 2 items were picked up out of the 16 that were available. If you have a lot of data in your Azure DevOps environment, I highly encourage having a filter of some sort. Filters should be on fields that are mapped. So if I wish to remove this and create a new rule, I can say title is equal to this, or if I have a different field that is mapped at the plan level, I can set that up. Work item type is Epic. If I click save, this will update and then it will filter the next time it runs. If I have more than one Azure DevOps integration, and they might be for different purposes, you can now edit the name. So I can go into here and say dev or QA. In this case, I'm going to say demo. When I click save and I go back to OneConnect, I can now see that demo naming convention, so I know what purpose it is for. For OnePlan configuration, let's go back. I'm going to create, actually, I'm just going to go here. I'm going to create a new epic. I'm going to give it a new name. I'm going to show you how that button name comes into play. If I go into my schedule and I go to the connected systems, as you can see, I have 2 Azure DevOps tiles. Naming one demo or listing the environment that you're using will help streamline how and where you know where you're connecting to. The demo name, just to recap, is not this name right here. It's actually when I went into OnePlan and I did the button name here. If I wish to change this button name, I can do so. However, it's not going to update here until I reinstall the integration. There are a few settings where you will have to reinstall the integration. One of them is the button name, and the second one is the sync to schedule. All other settings should automatically update regardless if you reinstall or not. All right, and that was going to be a pretty basic run through of integrations for Azure DevOps.
I think we're good to wrap up at this point. So thank you, Caroline.
Of course. I wish you all a wonderful day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Alrighty. So Caroline walked us today through a great demonstration of setting up OneConnect with Azure DevOps, as well as the end user experience of using that integration. So again, today we talked through OneConnect, particularly in relation to Azure DevOps, and again, going through that demonstration integrated with a bunch of tips and tricks as she was going through. So that brings us to the end of our session today. Thank you all for joining us here and learning about Azure DevOps and OneConnect. And thank you again, Caroline, for walking us through that awesome demonstration of setting up OneConnect and using OneConnect.